Leave the cabinet, Lori. Those papers aren't worth your life.
I just need the inspection file. If this place burns, I lose everything.
It's already burning. That file won't matter if you're still in here. The cabinet stays. You come with me.
Everything Hank left me is in that drawer.
And none of it will keep you warm if you die for it. Out the back! Move!
She went at last, coughing. In the nap room, the overnight aide was awake and already drifting toward the front doors. The ones you can see, so trust.
Not that way, Holly. That's the one part of this building that'll kill us.
Holly froze, half turned toward the glow at the front, every instinct in her screaming to run for it. Shouldn't the alarm be going off by now? There's no alarm, no bell, no smokehead, nothing. He crouched under the smoke, where the air was still honest. That silence tells me how bad it is. Hands on the wall, we go out the back. Okay, Holly said, fighting herself the whole way. Hands on the wall, everyone. Nobody lets go. The oldest in the line was 9, glasses fogging. And she was his. You're the back of the line, Marin. And the front of the little ones. I know. I keep their hands on the wall. That's it. Anybody's hand comes off. You put it back. You're part of the count. I'm part of the count, she said, and her voice did not shake. He counted them as they lined up, a hand on each head so his hands would hold a number his eyes couldn't. 7. The fire had reached him 10 minutes ago, not as a sound but as a smell, down in the basement, both hands in the old furnace, insulation cooking low and electrical. The silence had told him the rest. And if you had been standing there, you'd have wondered what kind of 9-year-old keeps a whole line of children's hands on a wall in the dark and does not shake. Backs of hands on the wall, low and slow. He moved them through the playroom where the smoke was a foot lower than it had been 90 seconds ago, past the reading corner, into the kitchen, where the rear door's push bar was cold under his palm, and the night air on the other side of it was the sweetest thing he had smelled in 7 years. He put them out onto the gravel one at a time, littlest riding, oldest walking, and he went back once. Not for glory, there was no glory in it, just arithmetic, because his hands had counted 6 and his mouth wanted 7, and the 7th was a boy frozen under the cubbies with his hood cinched down over his ears, doing exactly what someone had once told him to do, which was stay small and stay quiet. Emmett got him under one arm and walked out with the roof already talking above them in a language he'd spent 15 years learning and could not unlearn. 7 children, Holly and Lori Pruitt, out on the gravel with her folder still clamped to her chest. 0 left inside. The trucks came 4 minutes later, and the strobes turned the gravel lot red and white and red, and Holly stood in the middle of it, counting heads over and over with her hands shaking so hard she had to sit down in the frost, and a firefighter in full turnout came off the first engine, looked at the 7 kids wrapped in the crew's spare blankets, looked at the man kneeling among them with a toddler still zipped inside his coat, and said the thing that would, in about 30 hours, start ruining his life. There's no alarm history. Dispatch never got a trip. Not smoke, not manual, nothing. He wasn't accusing anybody. He was a tired man stating a fact into a cold morning. So how'd you know? How'd you get them out before we ever got a call? Emmett looked at the front of the building, where the fire was climbing the old service mast in exactly the pattern he'd read off the smoke, and he kept his face turned a little away from the man's flashlight. An old habit. The habit of somebody who had learned the hard way what happens when people get a good long look at you. The air told me, he said. It doesn't lie the way a door does. The firefighter blinked. The air. Smoke came down before it went up. That's electrical, in the walls, low and mean. Gas climbs. Grease climbs. He shifted the sleeping toddler higher. It doesn't take a genius. It takes somebody who was already listening for it. And you were listening for it. 3 in the morning, and the one man in that building who heard a fire nobody's alarms ever called in. I work nights, Emmett said. That's the whole job. He did not say the rest of it because the rest of it was a paper mill and a bypassed panel and a boy named Seth. And none of that belonged to these people at 3 in the morning. He carried Augie Merrick to the medic unit himself and buckled him into a mother's arms, and Brenna Merrick, a night shift nurse who had been paged out of a double at the county hospital, still in her scrubs, still smelling of the disinfectant of a different building, grabbed his sleeve with both hands and pressed her forehead to her son's hair and could not make words, only shape them. And the shape was thank you, thank you, thank you. He said, he's all right. He was the easiest one, and he doesn't remember to be afraid yet. And he peeled his sleeve gently out of her grip and went to find his own kid, because that was the whole job too. For one day, he was a miracle. He took Marin home to the apartment over the laundromat when the sun came up, and she fell asleep against the truck window on the 4-minute drive. And he carried her up the outside stairs the way he'd carried the toddler, one hand behind the head. He put her in her bed with her shoes on, which he never did, and he sat on the edge of it for a while. She woke up enough to say, "You counted us, all 7. You were part of the count, kiddo. You always are. I know." She was already going back under. "I kept the little one's hands on the wall. You said the wall doesn't move even when everything else does." "Did I say that?" He knew he had. "You say it every time you check our door." He didn't answer that. He stood up, and out of a habit older than she was, he crossed the room and put the back of his hand against their own front door before he shut off the light. Cool, cool, everything cool. And only then did he let himself believe the night was over. It was not over. It had barely started. The word came back to him 2 days later, sideways, the way the worst words always do. He heard it first from the woman at the gas station who wouldn't meet his eye, and then from a voicemail from the daycare's insurer, and then, finally, in plain block letters on a detective's card left in his mailbox, one word he could taste before he read it: arson. Because a fire that bad, in a place that was supposed to be safe, with a company on the hook and a lawyer already circling, a fire like that needs a name to carry it. And there was a name standing right there in the gravel lot. A big, quiet man who had moved through a burning building like he'd done it 1,000 times in the dark. Who knew the smoke was electrical before the trucks arrived. Who had a key to every room and a reason to be in the boiler room at 3 in the morning, and someone had helpfully remembered a past. That someone was Lorraine Pruitt. If you had met Laurie Pruitt at the grocery store, you would have liked her. 58, soft-spoken, careful with her sweaters, the kind of woman who remembered your kids' names. She had inherited little lanterns from her husband Hank when he dropped dead behind the wheel of the daycare van 3 winters back. And she had inherited with it a mortgage she couldn't carry, a building whose wiring predated the moon landing, and a monitoring contract she'd quietly let lapse 14 months ago because $90 a month was $90 she did not have. She was not a wicked woman. She was a drowning one. And drowning people do not choose villainy. They choose the nearest thing that floats, and they hold it under. The fire marshal's name was Harlan Voss, and he was the reason the truth had a chance, though nobody knew it yet, least of all Emmett. Voss was 50, unhurried, a man who read a burned building the way Emmett read smoke, and he did not care what the town wanted the story to be. On the second day, he stood in the black skeleton of the front room with Laurie Pruitt beside him and asked her plain questions, and Laurie, feeling the floor of her whole life tilt toward a word like negligence, a word like homicide, did not lie exactly. She just let a few true things lean. "He has keys to everything," she said. "He's down in that boiler room most nights, alone. That's where he was when it started. I'm not saying anything against him. He's always been strange, that's all. Keeps to himself. But you have to admit..." She pressed a tissue to her mouth. He knew. Before the smoke ever reached the street, I was standing right there and I didn't know a thing was wrong, and he already had a baby zipped inside his coat. A man doesn't just know a thing like that. She did not mention that she had been at her own desk that night with a shut-off notice she couldn't pay. She did not mention the folder she'd carried out through the smoke, or which drawer it had come from, or why a woman would fight a jammed cabinet in a burning building before she'd take a single step toward the children. Those were things that she needed no one to remember. "He works nights, ma'am. I heard he was in a fire before, at a mill somewhere." She said it like it hurt her to say it. "I'm sure it's nothing. I just think you should know who you're calling a hero." That was all it took. Not a lie, a lean. By the fourth day, the lean had become a landslide, and the landslide had a face. And the face, this was the part that would have broken a lesser man, belonged to Brenna Merrick. Because the town needed to say it out loud, and Brenna needed it worst of all. She had handed her whole heart to that building every night for a year so she could keep the lights on. And now someone was telling her the building had almost eaten her son, and there were only two ways to hold that. Either the place she trusted was a death trap, and she had driven her baby to it with her own hands every single shift, or a bad man had done a bad thing, and she'd been unlucky, not wrong. One of those you can survive. The other, you cannot. So she stood in front of a local news camera with Augie on her hip, the same boy Emmett had carried out zipped inside his coat, and she said it for the whole town at once. He knew before any of us, before the smoke reached the street. You tell me how a man knows that. Her voice cracked, and the crack made it true for everyone watching. You tell me how he knew. And then you tell me my son was safe with him in that building. They ran it at 6 and again at 11. By morning, nobody was saying hero. They were saying the janitor. They were saying you never really know people. Somebody spray-painted a word across the roll-up door of the laundromat downstairs, and Emmett scrubbed it off at dawn before Marin woke up, and it came off, mostly, and the ghost of it stayed in the paint for a long time after. Marin came home from school on the 5th day, with her hood up and her jaw set in a way he recognized, because it was his. "Marcus Feld said you lit it," she said, dropping her backpack. "He said his mom said. He said you did it for the insurance and you're going to jail. I know what they're saying. So, tell them." She wasn't crying. She got very precise instead, which was worse. "You saved everybody. There were 7 and you got 7. Just tell them what really happened." "It's not that simple, Mayor." "Why not? You were there. You know." He crouched down so they were eye to eye, and he thought about how to say the size of it to a 9-year-old. And he found he couldn't. So he said the small true thing instead. "Because the last time I told the whole truth about myself, out loud, where everybody could hear it, it cost me almost everything I had." He tucked a piece of hair behind her ear. "It didn't cost me you. But it came close. And I'm not real eager to roll those dice with the one thing I got to keep. Did you do it, Dad?" She looked at him with her mother's eyes, which was the cruelest trick her face could play on him. "Did you light the fire?" "No." "Then why won't you just say so?" He didn't have an answer that fit in her hands, so he gave her the only thing he could, which was to hold her eyes and not look away. And after a while she believed him, even though he'd told her nothing, and she went and did her homework, and he sat at the kitchen table with the detective's card and did not call the number on it. Here's the thing he could not say. The thing that lived under all of it, like the fire had lived under the daycare's front floor. 7 years ago, Emmett Rourke had been the emergency response lead at the Aldenford paper mill, 40 miles up the valley, back when the mill still ran 3 shifts, and the town still had a spine. He'd spent 15 years learning fire the way you learn a second language, not the romance of it, the grammar. How a recovery boiler talks before it screams. How combustible dust hangs in the air like a held breath. How to move 11 men out of a smoke-filled machine room on 1 bottle of air, calling the count so nobody gets left. He was good. He was the best they had. And he had filed, in writing, 3 separate times, a warning that Zone 4's suppression head had been bypassed, jumpered out, so it would stop tripping the whole line every time the humidity spiked. and costing the plant a shift's production. He had signatures. He had dates. Management had read everyone and buried everyone, because a nuisance shutdown cost money and a bypassed head cost nothing, until the night it cost everything. The night Zone 4 flashed. The suppression that should have dropped a curtain of water did nothing, because it had been told to do nothing. Emmett pulled 4 men out. He did not reach the 5th. The 5th was a 19-year-old he had personally walked through the gate on his first day, personally vouched for, personally promised their mother he would watch. His kid brother, Seth. And when the smoke cleared, and someone had to carry the weight of a dead boy, the mill did what buildings always do. It looked around for the quiet man who'd been closest to the fire, and it hung the whole thing on him. Sloppy protocol, they said. Failure to evacuate the zone in time. And it took his certification and his name, and it never once printed the word bypass. He'd told the truth then, loud in a hearing, with his signatures in his fist. And it hadn't mattered, because a company only needs a man to be the villain when the truth about the company is worse. His marriage, already thin, tore along that seam. Claire couldn't look at him without seeing her brother. And one spring she stopped trying, and she left, and she was still out there somewhere, alive, sending a birthday card to Marin, once a year, in handwriting that got a little more like a stranger's each time. He kept the girl. He took the quietest work he could find, in the quietest town he could find, and he chose, of all the jobs in the world, the one that surrounded him every night with the exact thing he had failed to save. And he checked the exits. Nobody paid him to check. And he waxed the floors, and he tried to be no one in particular. So when Laurie Pruitt let a monitoring contract lapse to save $90, and a fire came up out of an old panel with no bell to announce it, Emmett Rourke had recognized the whole shape of it before the first truck arrived. Not because he was a criminal, because he had already lived inside this exact lie once, and it had already taken a boy from him, and now it was reaching for a building full of them. Marin found the name first. He should have known she would. She was going through the milk crate of his old paperwork, looking for her shot records for a school form, and she came into the kitchen holding a laminated mill ID, a younger version of his face on it, and under the photo a line that said Emergency Response, Team Lead, and clipped behind it a funeral card, and on the funeral card a name. "Who's Seth?" she asked. He was quiet for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. Down in the street, somebody's tires hissed through the slush. "He was my brother," Emmett said finally. "Younger than me. I got him a job at a place that told everybody it was safe. And it wasn't. And there was a warning nobody listened to, and a door he trusted that lied to him, and I couldn't get to him in time." He took the card from her, gently, and looked at it. "I've spent a long time making sure nobody around here knew I was ever the guy who was supposed to keep a building full of people from burning. Turns out I'm not real good at it. Turns out I still check every door. That's why," she said slowly, working it the way she worked a long division problem, all the way to the remainder. "That's why you knew the smoke. That's why you knew the front was bad. You knew because there wasn't any." She stopped. Her eyes came up. "There wasn't any alarm, was there? Not that you beat? There just wasn't one." "No, baby," he said. "There wasn't one at all." And that was the thing the whole town had gotten exactly backwards. And he saw in his daughter's face the moment she understood it. And he thought, for one dangerous second, that maybe if a 9-year-old could see it, so could a jury. And then he remembered the last hearing, and the way the truth had sat in the room like a stranger nobody wanted to seat, and he put the thought away. Voss, meanwhile, was doing the slow, honest work almost nobody else in town had the patience for. The origin and cause was pointing hard at the front wall, at the ancient service panel, at insulation cooked from the inside, at a burn pattern that started low and electrical and climbed, exactly the way a man who mopped floors had described it to a firefighter in a gravel lot. But Voss needed one more thing to make it a wall the lawyers couldn't climb, and that thing was in the hands of a third party, the monitoring company's records, the ones that would show whether the panel had ever had a chance to call for help. He'd put in for them. A subpoena moves at the speed a subpoena moves. He waited. Not everybody in town had made up their mind. Holly Brandt came up the outside stairs on the 5th night, still in the same hoodie she'd had on in the gravel lot, and she stood in his doorway, with her arms crossed hard over herself. And she didn't come in. "They're saying you did it," she said, "at the meeting tonight. The parents. They're saying it like it's already true. I know. I was there." Her jaw was working. "I was 6 feet from you the whole time. You wouldn't let me open the front door. You put yourself between me and it. And you said it would feed the fire. And I didn't understand what that meant until the marshal explained it to me 2 days later. That if I'd shoved that push bar, like every bone in my body wanted to, I'd have pulled the fire right down the hall onto all of us." She wiped her nose with the back of her wrist, angry, not sad. "A man setting a fire doesn't do that. A man setting a fire lets the scared girl open the wrong door. You did the opposite of that with your whole body, and now they've got me down as a witness for their side, and I want to know what I'm supposed to do with that." "You tell the truth if they ask you," Emmett said. "That's all. You don't carry any more of this than that. They moved the kids, you know. Today." She said it like it was nothing, and it stopped his heart. "To the church, the fellowship hall over on 3rd, till they figure out something permanent. The county's paying the Methodists $100 a week for the room." She shook her head. "It smells like mildew, and there's one working outlet in the whole kitchen, but it's a room." He went very still. "Which contractor did the county use for the wiring on that hall? Do you know? Why would I—" She stopped, reading his face. "You're doing the thing you did in the smoke, where you get real quiet and everybody else should get scared." She took a step back down the stairs. What is it?" "Probably nothing," he lied. And it was the first time he'd lied to her. And she knew it, and she left uneasy. And he stood in the doorway with a cold thing opening in his chest. Laurie Pruitt did not wait well. She came to the laundromat on the 6th night, up the outside stairs, and she stood in his doorway wringing the strap of her purse. And it was not the scene you would expect. She did not offer him a deal. She did not slide papers across a table. She just stood there, a drowning woman, and she begged. "Let it be the mill," she said. Her voice was very small. "That's all I'm asking. They already think it's already half where it needs to be. If you just let them think it was you, if you don't go digging into the wiring, into the account, I can keep the doors. It's all Hank left me. It's all I have. You've been blamed before, Emmett. You lived through it. You're still standing." A tear went down the side of her nose. "I won't. Do you understand me? I will not survive it." And the terrible thing was that he did understand her. He knew exactly the size of the water she was in because he'd been in it. He could have hated her, and it would have been so much easier. And he found that he couldn't, quite. "I know what it is you're asking me," he said. "You're asking me to stand where I stood 7 years ago and say it was my fault, so somebody else doesn't have to. And I did it once. I let a company make me the reason, and it cost a boy his name on top of his life." He shook his head slowly. "The past is the exact reason I can't do it again. I'm sorry, Laurie. I truly am. But I already know how this story goes when the quiet man agrees to be the reason. It ends with another kid in the smoke." She left crying. He stood in the doorway a long time after, and he did not feel like a man who had won anything, because he knew where the next kid in the smoke was going to be, and nobody would listen. The daycare kids had been relocated, temporarily, to the fellowship hall of the Methodist Church 3 blocks over, while the parents scrambled and the county wrung its hands. A big open room with a little kitchen and a sub-panel in the back closet. And Emmett, who forgot nothing about buildings, remembered a work order he'd seen taped inside the daycare's utility room months ago, back when he was just the man who fixed things. The same contractor, the same cut-rate subpanels. And when he made a phone call he had no right to make, pretending to be somebody he wasn't, he learned the thing that put ice in his chest. The church's fire monitoring ran through the same regional account Lori Pruitt had let lapse. The same deadline, the same silence, waiting. He told Holly. He told the county coordinator. He tried to tell Voss's office and got a voicemail. And every one of them heard the same thing, which was not a warning from a fire expert, but a story from an accused arsonist, a suspect telling them that the very children he was accused of nearly killing were in danger again. Isn't that convenient, sir? Please stay away from the property. He was radioactive. His knowledge, which was real, which was earned in blood, was worth exactly nothing because of the word attached to his name. Same account, he said to the coordinator, low and level, holding on to the last of his patience with both hands. Same panel, same man signed off on nothing. You put those kids in that room, you're loading the same gun that already went off. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to call the monitoring company and ask them one question. Is that building's line live? That's all. One question. Sir, I'm going to need you to not come near the church. They moved the kids in anyway on the 8th day because there was nowhere else. And because the alternative was believing a man the whole town had already decided about. That was also the day the warrant came through. Arson. If they took him, there was no one. Claire was a return address and a stranger's handwriting. There were no grandparents. There was no one. And Marin would go into the system that night, while the paperwork sorted itself out. A 9-year-old with a crooked ponytail carried off to a stranger's house because her father had carried 7 children out of a fire. He sat in the truck outside the church, in the cold with his hands on the wheel, and did the only math that had ever mattered to him. If they take me tonight, he said out loud to no one, where does she sleep tomorrow? He should have driven away. Any sane man would have driven away. Put 100 miles between him and that warrant, become a rumor. He couldn't. He'd left one building too late in his life. He was not built to do it twice. So he stayed, parked across the street from the church fellowship hall, watching a room full of small windows he wasn't allowed within 1,000 feet of. And he waited for the thing he already knew was coming. The way you wait for a name you can't stop yourself from saying. It came at 2:40 in the afternoon, and it did not come as a bell, because there was still no bell. It came as a smell. He was out of the truck before he decided to be, standing at the edge of the church lot with his head up like a dog, and he caught it on the cold air, that same mop water reek of insulation cooking behind a wall. And then he saw the first thin gray thread find the seam of a window and lie flat against the glass, low, spreading sideways instead of up. And every cell in his body told him the same thing his training had, electrical, in the wall, and no one inside knew yet, because the building had no voice. A sheriff's deputy was on him before he made it 10 feet. Rourke. Rourke, you cannot be here. There is a warrant. There's smoke in that wall. Emmett didn't fight him. He put both hands up, open, visible, because he had been on the wrong side of enough of these to know how fast a scared man with a badge turns one tragedy into two. Feel the northeast corner of that building and tell me I'm lying, electrical, low, in the closet with the panel. There are kids in there, and that building can't tell them. I'm the only one who can hear it. And you got me by the arm. The deputy hesitated, half a second, the length of a heartbeat. And it was enough, because in that half second the fellowship hall's rear door banged open, and Holly Brandt was in it, coughing, herding the first knot of children out into the parking lot, and she looked across the lot and found Emmett's face like it was the only fixed point in the world. Emmett, I can't find... She was counting. He could see her counting, her hands moving, and he watched her count come up wrong the way his always came up wrong in his nightmares. There's 2 still. One of the little ones went back for his shoes, and Marin went after him. She went back in after him. The world went very narrow and very quiet, because Marin was in the smoke. His Marin who kept the little one's hands on the wall, who was part of the Count, who had gone back into a building with a dead voice and a live panel because a smaller kid was scared, and she was not. He took 2 steps and the deputy had him again. Both arms this time. Another body coming to help, and Emmett Rourke, who had once walked into a machine room a dozen trained men had backed away from, who had the reach and the knowledge and every earned right to go through that door, could not go through that door. They had him. On paper, he was the danger. On paper, the safest thing in the world was to keep him out of that building, and the paper was going to get his daughter killed. And he understood with a clarity that hollowed him out that this time he could not be the one to carry her out. So he did the only thing left. He stopped fighting the men holding him, because fighting them cost seconds. And instead he put every ounce of 15 years and 1 dead brother into his voice. And he aimed it through the open rear door into the smoke, low, where he knew she'd be, where he'd taught her to be. Marin. Not panic. He drove the panic down under it the way you'd hold a door shut with your whole body. Marin, it's Dad. Can you hear me? Tap the wall twice if you hear me. A pause that lasted a year. And then Holly heard it. Her head snapped toward the door. 2 small sounds against drywall from somewhere low inside. Good, that's good. His voice didn't shake. It was the calmest voice he owned, the one he'd used in the machine room, the one he'd sworn he'd never need again. Backs of your hands on the wall, both of you. You feel the wall. You don't feel a door, understand? Doors lie. The wall doesn't move even when everything else does. You keep the wall on your right shoulder and you walk toward my voice, low and slow. Running breathes it in. We walk. You got the little one? Silence. Then thin from inside. I've got Beau. He won't stand up. Then he crawls and you crawl with him. Hand on the wall, hand on him. Trust the air down there, Mare. It's honest down low. It'll walk you right out to me. Not the light. Not the door you can see. The air. Come to my voice. The deputies had stopped pulling. Nobody was moving. The whole lot was holding its breath around one man on his knees at the edge of the property line, not allowed 1 inch closer, talking his daughter out of a burning room with nothing but the sound of himself. Keep talking to me, he said. Tell me you're on the wall. I'm on the wall. Closer now, coughing. Beau's on my back. That's my girl. That's the whole job. You're doing the whole job. 10 more feet. The air gets sweeter. You'll feel it. That's how you know you're almost to me. Don't stop for anything you can see. Trust the air, not the door. And a small shape came low out of the gray in the doorway. A 9-year-old on her hands and knees with a 4-year-old clamped to her back, and both their faces black with smoke. And she crawled across the threshold into the cold, clean afternoon, and lifted her head and found her father's face, exactly where his voice had promised it would be. I trusted the air, Dad, Marin said, and then she started to cry, and the deputies finally let go of him, and Emmett crossed the last 20 feet of that parking lot on his knees, and gathered both children into him and did not let go. 7 out of the daycare, 2 out of the church, every single one, and a fire that never got the chance to become an inferno, because a man who wasn't allowed within 1,000 feet of the building had read it through a wall. They arrested him anyway. Right there in the lot, because the warrant was the warrant. And a deputy with smoke in his eyes cuffed the man who had just talked 2 kids out of a fire. And the timing of it, the accused arsonist, showing up out of nowhere at the exact moment a second fire started, looked to every phone filming it, like the most damning thing anyone had ever seen. There he is again, right before it started. What kind of man keeps turning up at fires? It held for about 6 hours, because Harlan Voss had gotten his records that same morning, and Harlan Voss did not care what the phones thought. The monitoring company's sealed logs told a story no lawyer could unwrite. Little Lantern's fire monitoring service had been canceled 14 months prior, cancelled by account holder L. Pruitt, with a confirmation number and a date. On the night of the fire, there had been no communication path for the building to raise an alarm, because the building had been quietly, deliberately, unplugged from anyone who could hear it. Lori Pruitt had carried her own copies of the inspection records out through the smoke that night, clamped to her chest while 7 children slept behind her. But the monitoring company's logs had never been hers to burn, and the origin and cause report, filed that afternoon, put the source in the front wall service panel. Aged conductors, insulation failure, an electrical ignition that started low and climbed, and stapled to the back, the deferred maintenance estimate Lori Pruitt had been sitting on for 2 years, a licensed electrician's quote to replace the exact panel that burned, unsigned, unpaid, unacted upon. And the church, when they finally checked the one thing Emmett had begged them to check, ran on the same dead account and the same contractor's subpanel, and had failed the same way for the same reason. Voss stood in front of the cameras that had spent a week convicting a janitor, and he was not a dramatic man, and he did not raise his voice. "I've heard a lot of talk about how this man knew before the alarm," he said. "So let me be clear about something, because it's the whole case. There was no alarm. Not at the daycare. Not at the church. The monitoring was cancelled over a year ago to save money, and nobody in either building could have been warned by a system because the system had been switched off. This man didn't beat the alarm. He didn't hear the fire early." Voss looked, for a moment, straight into the lens. He heard the silence. He's the only person in either of those buildings who understood that the silence was the emergency. That's not how a fire gets set. That's how a fire gets survived. They took the cuffs off him in a county hallway with no ceremony, and the DA's office issued a 2-line statement, and the word arson never appeared next to his name again, except in the corrections that ran under the original stories. Small, the way corrections always run. Lori Pruitt was charged. Reckless endangerment, obstruction, filing a false report. And the strange thing, the thing that would stay with Emmett, was that watching it happen brought him no joy at all. He went down to the county building the day of her arraignment for reasons he couldn't fully name, and he saw her come out afterward, smaller than he remembered, holding a photograph she couldn't seem to put down, and he understood that she was not a monster and had never been one. She was a woman who'd been handed a drowning business and a dead husband and had made, in terror, the same choice a company had once made about him: find the nearest quiet man and hold him under. It had almost worked twice. That was the thing about the lie. It always almost worked. Brenna Merrick found him in the church parking lot a week later, where he'd gone, uninvited, to help the volunteers clear the fire-damaged drywall out of the fellowship hall, because he could not seem to stop taking care of buildings that weren't his. She stood a few feet away with Augie on her hip, the boy squirming to get down, and for a while she couldn't make the words, any more than she'd been able to at 3 a.m, except this time it wasn't gratitude choking her. "You had my son against your chest," she said. "You carried him out, zipped inside your coat, so he wouldn't breathe it. And then I stood in front of a camera, and I told the whole town, you—" Her voice broke all the way. "I did that. I looked at the man who saved him, and I called him the thing that almost killed him." Emmett set down the sheet of drywall he was carrying. "You were scared," he said. "You had to choose between the building being wrong and you being wrong, and there's only one of those a mother can carry home at night. I know how that math works. I've done it." He looked at the boy, who had gone still, and was watching him with the enormous, unbothered eyes of the very young. "He's here. Your son is here. And he's going to grow up. And he's not going to remember any of this. That's the only part that has to count now. Let the rest of it go." She didn't answer. She just put her free hand briefly over her mouth and nodded, and Augie reached out and grabbed a fistful of Emmett's jacket the way he had in the smoke, and then let go. And that was the closest thing to an apology the afternoon was going to give anybody, and it was enough. There was no ceremony. The town wanted to give him one. There was talk of a plaque, a night at the council meeting, a photograph for the paper. And he declined all of it quietly, the way he declined everything that would make people look too long at his face. He didn't want to be the man on the screen. He'd spent 7 years trying to be no one in particular, and he wasn't ready to stop, and maybe he never would be. And that was allowed. The catharsis, when it came in the kitchen, over the laundromat, the way the only things that ever mattered to him did. Marin was doing her homework, and she stopped in the middle of a long division problem, and without looking up, she said, "You couldn't get Seth out. He was washing a dish." He set it in the rack. "No," he said, "I couldn't," because there was a warning nobody listened to, and a door that lied. She was still not looking at him, which was how he knew she'd been carrying this around for days, turning it over, working it down to the remainder. "So now you check every door, and you count everybody, every single time." "Yeah," Emmett said. His voice wasn't quite steady. "That's about the size of it." She looked up at him then, and she didn't have her mother's eyes in that moment. She had her own, clear and certain, and entirely hers. "Nobody stayed in the dark this time," she said. "Not one. You heard it before it could hurt anybody, and you told me to trust the air. And I did. And nobody stayed in the dark." She went back to her homework. "Seth would think that's a pretty good job." Emmett Rourke stood at his kitchen sink with his hands still wet and let his daughter see his face do the thing it had not done in 7 years. And he did not turn it away from her. And she did not look away from him. And outside, the first hard frost of the season was closing white and quiet over a town that had learned, a little late, the difference between a man who starts fires and a man who has spent his whole life listening for them. He went back to work that night. Of course he did. He mopped the floors of a rec center now, a different building, a quieter one. And when everyone had gone home, he walked the halls. He wasn't paid to walk, and put the back of his hand against every fire door in the place, one after another. Cool. Everything cool. Not because anyone had asked him to, because a building will tell you the truth if there's one person left awake who knows how to listen, and because somewhere up the valley, there's a boy who trusted a door that lied, and a man who will spend the rest of his nights making sure the air, at least, stays honest. If you've got a person like that in your life, the quiet one, the one who checks the doors, the one who never wants the plaque, tonight would be a good night to let them know you noticed. They almost never think anybody does.